Halo's seen it all. It started as a massive success, making an entirely new player in the typically stable console market a true competitor. Found further success with sequels while pioneering console multiplayer experiences. It then became the epitome of a hardcore and pretty toxic culture within gaming that surrounded professional or ranked play, ushering in more mainstream esports with MLG. It was then eclipsed by Call of Duty, and while still popular, would lose some of the revelry reserved for it as Bungie split from Microsoft and the series was picked up by 343 Industries. During this time and a bit after it, there was a crisis of identity. A futuristic sci-fi shooter was stuck with trying to adapt to changing trends and expectations so as to not show its age and fall behind. It was trying to satisfy new and old, ultimately satisfying neither. But then, in the long wait between Halo 5 and Infinite, it crossed the line. It was old enough that people were nostalgic about it. People wanted Halo to be itself, to recapture the freedom and awe from the original. Halo Infinite is by no means perfect, but it's certainly talked about more than Halo 5 was, and does legitimately recapture some of that Halo 1 magic. Now that the series has overcome adolescence and seemingly settled into a better sense of self, I think it makes sense to go back to the beginning and analyze Halo Combat Evolved. I have an incredibly distinct memory of watching my friend race against time in its Warthog, trying to escape in the final mission of the game. I don't particularly remember being too taken with it, but it still stayed with me. And when my brother got a copy of Halo 3 when it released in 2007, I think I was more excited than he was. My mom actually allowed me to play it as it was rated M and not MA15+, and I was obsessed. It remains one of my favourite games of all time, and Halo is one of those series that I'll chuck the blinders on for and enjoy kind of uncritically because I'm so fond of it, though that will change today. However, as mentioned, it all started with Combat Evolved. Development began around the second half of '97, when Bungie was only around 15 people or so. This initial iteration was called Armor and was a sci-fi RTS. As the project progressed, it moved on to being a third-person shooter, being officially unveiled at Macworld 1999. The demo shown was worked on to the final hour, literally, being completed on the flight to New York for the presentation. Although hype was building for Halo, Bungie was suffering financial troubles. They signed a deal with Take-Two Interactive in response before being bought outright by Microsoft to add another title to the launch lineup of their then upcoming console, the Xbox. The deal was announced in June of 2000, and around the same time another shift in perspective would happen. As development proceeded, Halo started to focus more on the main character, Master Chief, and so third person was ditched in favour of first person, making the player feel less removed from the experience. With their recent acquisition, Microsoft hired an external marketing firm to take a look at the game, who insisted that the name be changed. The three parties went back and forth for months before a compromise was made. The game would still be called Halo, but the subtitle Combat Evolved would be added, despite having no relevance to the actual game or its plot or anything really. Although technically being in development for 4 years, apparently around 90% of Halo CE was made in just 9 months, under an intense period of crunch that makes for a romantic story, but a horrible reality of game development. Halo Combat Evolved launched on November the 5th in 2001 with the original Xbox, and is generally said to be the game that made Microsoft's move into the console market a successful one. Without it, the Xbox brand may very well have ended on its first iteration. So let's take a look at it. When you reach the title screen, all you see is a massive ring with a surface much like our own, slowly rotating, and all you hear are reverent chants, complete with the vocalist breaths. The camera begins to pan around the ring and you get a better look at its dense, congested but still sleek outside surface. Immediately, Halo's creating a contrast between familiar and unfamiliar. The ring looks like Earth on one side, but is so obviously foreign and completely unknown to us in every other aspect. That contrast also exists contextually within Halo's place in the FPS market. This title screen doesn't quickly fade to a highlight reel of the most adrenaline-pumping moments of action in the game to amp us up like its competitors. It instead creeps along besides the fascinating structure. Because Halo's not trying to elicit excitement here, but rather curiosity. These unfamiliar parts are made even more so by the recognizable elements that exist within them. Halo Combat Evolved is centered around mystery from the very first frame, and will keep that focus throughout the entire experience. That, combined with the religious allusions and themes present so far via the name and music, make this title screen a fantastic preparatory measure, one that prepares you by making you feel, in fact, unprepared, completely unsure of what exactly you're about to get into, which is precisely the opposite of what those title screen highlight reels from other games do. The other major part of the pre-game setup is learning some background information from the manual, because this is from a time when that was still a thing. Here's what it tells us. The game takes place in the year 2552, a time where humanity has long since colonized other planets due to the overpopulation of Earth. Humanity operates under the United Nations Space Command, or UNSC, which has facilitated the colonization effort. 32 years earlier, in 2520, a human settlement made contact with the Covenant, a militantly religious collective of alien races. Covenant leaders stated that humanity were an affront to their gods, and so war was declared and has been waged ever since. On planet Reach, which is a hub of military and scientific activity, super soldiers called Spartans are being developed. Back in 2552, the second generation of these soldiers, imaginatively called Spartan IIs, are made the center of a plan to storm a Covenant ship and learn the location of the alien collective's homeworld. 2 days before the mission is set to begin, the Covenant appear and completely glass Reach, decimating it. The Pillar of Autumn, a UNSC cruiser, manages to escape with the final Spartan II and makes a blind FTL jump into deep space, hoping to draw the Covenant away from Reach, and that's where the first cutscene picks up. The commander of the Autumn and a respected military leader, Captain Keyes, is asking Cortana, an advanced AI that runs the Autumn, how the Covenant managed to catch up to their blind jump so fast, at which point Cortana mentions that their technology has always been more advanced. This opening does a few important things efficiently and effectively. Firstly, it establishes Cortana's ability to analyze and access data through her quick retorts, while her tone of voice gives way to her personality, coming across as though what she's saying is obvious. There's sass and confidence there. Secondly, it does the same for Keyes. His voice is steady and self-assured. He's composed under this serious situation and clearly takes time to deliberate on what his orders are, delivering them with confidence once he's decided, which in this case is putting the Autumn in a combat alert and making sure everyone on the ship is at their station. Finally, it immediately tells us that the Covenant are a threat to us. They're more dangerous and better equipped. That final one may seem minor, but I think conveying the Covenant's character and importance to the player is one of the most vital parts of Halo's first narrative chunk. When the captain said everyone must be at their stations, that included the Spartan II currently cryogenically frozen. As Master Chief is brought out of his sleep, the chants return, creating ties to the biblical figures while ascribing a sort of divine significance to him. A terminal in the cryo bay reads, "Unseal the hushed casket." This is a reference to John Keats's sonnet To Sleep. In the poem, John Keats writes of someone begging for sleep to come as a metaphor for death, contrasting it with the quote, "many woes that seeing day once more would inevitably bring." In the final line, the speaker asks that the hushed casket of their souls be sealed. The use of this line has 3 different meanings relating to Master Chief. The first is the most obvious and literal. Master Chief is being woken up, so the hushed casket is being unsealed. The second ties into the purposeful and constant juxtaposition between the chaos and unrest of day, or life, and the peace and quiet of night, or death. This ties directly to the circumstances. Master Chief is being woken up precisely because everything's fallen apart. It's become unruly. Finally, by implying that Master Chief's current cryo-sleep is akin to death, him being woken up becomes a resurrection. That divinity imposed upon him by the chants positions him as a savior figure, being resurrected after death, much like Jesus. There are 4 or 5 people dedicated to the simple task of getting him out of the pod. His power, reputation and ability, and by extension ours, already preceding him. The second he wakes up, you're in his perspective. There's a quick tutorial that could just be explained by some pop-ups, but instead there's an interactive and quite mundane sequence that creates stronger ties between the player and Chief. The game saying, no, you're not just now learning how all these basic things operate, but rather your memory's being jogged. Of course, you as the player have always been an incredibly skilled super soldier. The framing plays into the adoring intro to Chief and makes you feel more at home in his role. It's also legitimately helpful on a gameplay level, as some of these concepts did need to be explained at the time. Using left stick to move and right stick to control the camera was not the standard for console FPSs. In fact, a standard hadn't been established yet until this game, which would firmly plant this dual stick control scheme as the given for shooters going forward. This single element's importance can't be understated. It's what sets Halo apart and has caused it to age much better than many of its console FPS peers. The other main aspect that the tutorial teaches you is the rechargeable shields you have. Your shields will be depleted as you take damage, but they naturally regenerate after a few seconds. This was pretty uncommon for FPSs. In Doom, Wolfenstein, Half-Life, Quake and many others, health is restored by pickups around the levels, so prioritizing this mechanic by adding it to the tutorial makes sure this important information is properly understood by the player. While the tutorial does let you get a sense of belonging as Master Chief, that's quickly undermined as Covenant elites break into the room and cut the weapons diagnostic tests short. Despite being this super soldier, there's nothing you can do to save the people in the control room. The mood switches and the urgency is amped up. As you rush towards Captain Keyes, another explosion rings out, killing the man who conducted the tutorial and leaving you alone with no weapons. Crew members cower as plasma grenades explode at their feet, and Covenant cut you off your route, following the natural signposting that's on the floor. This is a really great sequence which makes you feel vulnerable and threatened and panicked. The threat of the Covenant implicates upon gameplay to again reinforce that fact. It also quickly teaches you how to navigate the Autumn as a space, and the different tells to look for, like doors with green lights or arrows on the floor. This mission involves navigating the ship, and so teaching you this now leaves less room for frustration later on, all within a context that makes it feel narratively appropriate. You get to the bridge as an impact takes the Autumn's main defenses offline. As such, Keyes initiates Call Protocol, which is a UNSC directive that ensures the Covenant don't find any data about Earth or its location. That may be achieved by erasing all the databases of a ship if it comes into contact with an alien vessel, or in this case making absolutely sure that an AI, like Cortana, doesn't fall into enemy hands. Keyes plans to land the ship on the ring object that their blind jump spat them out next to. The character and dynamic of all three characters shines through again, giving a distinct impression of Keyes' dedication, Cortana's insistence on knowing what's best, and Chief's ability to say yes sir and do literally whatever anyone tells him to, no questions asked. Cortana's inserted into Chief's helmet, Keyes hands you a handgun, and now you gotta find a way off the Autumn. That handgun isn't actually loaded, and that makes it so your first engagement with the weapon sandbox is to pick up ammunition, which will inform the general rhythm and feel of short and long-term gameplay. Unlike most shooters of the time, you can only hold 2 weapons at once. There's no restriction on what they can be, one doesn't have to be a sidearm for example, but you can only ever hold 2. Like health, ammo doesn't come from predetermined pickups that are placed, but rather from weapons that can be found lying on the ground. New weapons are acquired much the same way. You find them on the corpses of the Covenant or your comrades, not in special rooms or at the end of each level. These few things are exemplified through that empty handgun, and they cue you into what gameplay will be like. It's scrappy and adaptive as you have to abandon weapons as they run out of ammo. You just have to manage with what you have and what's around you. There's very little luxury or indulgence. Although you may have preferences for different guns, in many cases no allegiances should be made. Those weapons won't always be at your disposal, and that goes for Covenant weapons too. Now this isn't a fucking Resident Evil game, you're not constantly hurting for ammo, but you will regularly find yourself dropping guns to pick up new ones. However, little of this truly applies to this level. Halo wisely uses the location to surround you with ammo for the pistol and assault rifle, so you can comfortably spend this whole mission just getting used to those. So I'll just cover them for now, and leave the complexities of gunplay for when it becomes more relevant. The Halo 1 pistol is legendary, mostly because in multiplayer it kills with 3 headshots, but also because of how insane the range on this thing is. The suite of weapons in this first game is pretty limited, and so the pistol compensates for the gaps, which is why it's so damn useful. It has a steady, manageable rate of fire which allows for consistently high damage output, and a 12 bullet magazine which is enough to dispatch with a few enemies without having to reload, while also creating tense moments of vulnerability when facing larger groups of Covenant. It rewards carefully placed shots, especially to the head, and as mentioned has a fantastic effective range, making it viable at most distances. It's useful in pretty much any situation and in combination with any other gun. It's the backbone of Halo 1's weapons sandbox, and it's the perfect choice for your introduction to combat. It helps contextualize the other elements and variables of gunfights. You'll quickly learn how many bullets it takes to kill each enemy type with it, and as such you'll inevitably use it as your point of reference when figuring other weapons out. That's what makes its rate of fire so important. There's distinct timing to kills with the pistol, which makes those comparisons to other guns easy to draw and quantify. It also feels great to use. Admittedly, the sound of it firing is a bit modest for how powerful it can be, but the recoil effectively communicates its weight and caliber. The small clicks and clacks as you reload sound great.
Secondary defensive position.
And I also really love the sound when you aim down sights. It's this pseudo-metallic sound combined with a lens zooming in that's really satisfying. The assault rifle, while good, I don't think quite meets the standard set by the pistol. It does serve a purpose. With such a high rate of fire, a 60 round magazine and a 600 bullet capacity, it's useful for constant damage output at closer ranges. Groups of grunts can be dealt with by way of hectic spraying, and that consistency of damage causes enemies to flinch, giving you openings to quickly finish them off with the pistol. I think the assault rifle falls short in its feel. It doesn't have as much impact to it as it looks and sounds like it should, owing to the lack of recoil. You're eased into using these guns with simple encounters that interact with the space around them to craft unique situations. You face just grunts and elites. Grunts are weak enemies that show up in groups to pepper you with plasma pistols and act as a nuisance, while the elites, which have energy shields much like yours, use stronger plasma rifles to deal the real damage. They have an easy to understand dynamic which suits your current weapons really well. Grunts can easily be sprayed by the assault rifle as mentioned, but at longer ranges it's easier to use a single well-placed pistol shot to the head. It's easier to break the agile elite shields with the assault rifle and then switch to the pistol while they're enraged and hit them in the noggin. How you use your tools depends on the size and obstacles of the area you find yourself in. The Autumn reveals itself to continually be a really great choice for this first level, as it believably allows for these diverse rooms while still keeping everything contained and confined, making enemies easier to hit and deal with. It also allows for very guided, linear level design without breaking the spell of immersion. Inoperable doors, rubble and fires all help to funnel you into the right path, believably blending into the circumstance as small fights distract from the lack of freedom. The game slows down as you have to move through dark access ways, relying on your flashlight to progress. The music mellows out and tense strings come and go. As you exit the access ways, everything's quiet, and instead of jumping into active firefights or taking down Covenant as they board the ship, you instead find groups of the aliens milling about, as though you're becoming the intruder here. This plays into the narrative of gameplay for this mission. Your initial gameplay involves fighting alongside UNSC soldiers as Covenant board. Then they firmly establish their presence and things slow down, relying more on melee and radar to reinforce a quieter sensation to your fights. Finally, you come across groups of Covenant who flipped over weapon racks for cover, having prepared for your arrival. Gameplay chronicles the Covenant's growing dominance in this fight and continues to reinforce the threat they pose. This first mission is really well designed, putting in lots of work to set up Halo's focus, the mystery of the ring, the danger of the Covenant, the personality of 3 different characters, the religious references, the general feel and moods of gameplay, and the controls. The flip and power dynamic on the ship makes escape feel like the only option, and fortunately you come across some escape pods. Chief jumps in one already filled with soldiers, leaving the now much less composed Pillar of Autumn behind. Keyes opts for a manual landing of the cruiser against Cortana's recommendation. The lifeboat quickly approaches the ring and crash lands on its surface.
Chief? Chief, can you hear me? At last! Are you alright? Can you move? Yeah, there's the impact. There's nothing we can do.
When Master Chief comes to, he finds that everyone in the pod with him died, sprawled across the grass. Then you look up and take in the landscape around you. This ring is Halo. The grassy field is littered with trees and flanked by stone cliffs that extrude from the ring's surface. A river runs through it, and the sound of it rushing by really sticks out thanks to the lack of music. There's a contrast here, the dead bodies staining the really beautiful environment around you, making it clear that while it looked familiar, you know nothing about this place and you probably don't belong here. It being called Halo is of course another religious reference, and just to preface, it will also vary how much I delve into this subject. Many of the references in Halo 1 are just that, references, used to create thematic ties throughout the narrative. They will go on to have much more significance and meaning in later games, so I'm going to get into the finer intricacies when they become relevant within the Halo series' history. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. Halos have been used to symbolize a holy figure, someone or something with a connection to a god or gods since ancient Mesopotamia to as recently as 8 minutes ago when I poorly photoshopped one over Carly Rae Jepsen's head. By ascribing this theological connection to the ring, the air of mystery surrounding it only increases, causing us to ponder its purpose and role as we continue on, helping compel us forward beyond the immediate objective. As you cross a nearby bridge, Covenant dropships come in as single-man air vehicles called Banshees chase you down. This area makes very sure that you push forward quite promptly, as you're not only driven by your curiosity, but the Covenant on your tail and the sheer cliff behind you, giving you only one direction to go. On top of this, there's no navigation marker on your screen, it's just the design that's pushing you forward. And once you approach the group of Covenant in front of you, the Banshees actually back off, giving you room to have your first little fight in an open space. That's then followed by some quiet time as you move forward, giving you room to take everything in. Over the hill you locate some Marines trying to fend off Covenant as their dropships approach one after the other. You help with the defense and face Jackals for the first time. They're agile and carry a shield in one hand, making them tough to hit. The key is to shoot the hand that's not holding the shield to have them reel back, opening themselves up to gunfire. Fights on the ring are much more mobile than the tight interiors of the Autumn. There's little cover, and so your distance and angle from enemies is ever changing, creating dynamic situations that call for the use of different weapons. But as you're limited to 2, at times you have to maneuver yourself so that you're in the best position to take advantage of them. Fire is also likely to be coming at you from different directions. These factors make for decision-dense encounters that feel meaningful and consequential without being overwhelming or irritatingly difficult. Fights are also improved by the personality and design of the Covenant combatants. The Covenant hegemony is a collective of alien races, and the Grunts, or Ongoi, rank lowest in the caste system. This leaves them with little allegiance, and so they're quick to run away and stop fighting, all while amusingly whining and panicking. Visually, they're quite short with an exoskeleton around their torso and a breathing apparatus on their face, as they breathe methane and not oxygen. They're entertaining during fights, and due to the exoskeleton, the head rests in the middle of their silhouette, making headshots more unique to execute from a gameplay perspective. The Jackals, or Kigya, are wiry and sinewy, with prominent snouts that resemble beaks, scaly skin and tufts of feathers. They vocalize through squawks and chitters, making for a distinct presence on the battlefield. The Elites, or Sanghili, are the highest ranking and most sophisticated of this trio of enemies. They stand between 7 and 8 feet tall and are very muscular, with 4 mandibles below the upper jaw. They wield more powerful weapons like the plasma rifle, and their deep voices can be heard barking commands or exclamations. They're also quite athletic, which when combined with their strength and firepower, make them imposing figures. The fact that most of this information can be pertained within the game just by looking and listening to them is a testament to how authentic they feel within the world. The Covenant are believable, and that makes their threat more tangible and easy to grasp. The diversity of them adds onto this, with the differences between species and then differences within those species adding complexity and forethought to their creation and integration. They certainly don't feel generic, and the clear history within the hegemony only adds to the layers of mystery that are being stacked before you. Having to face so many of them, you'll probably be using some Covenant weapons here as well. The Needler, which the Grunts can carry, is one of those weapons that's lots of fun when it works, but can often feel ill-suited for the circumstance or too situational in its ideal use case. If you manage to stick an enemy with 5 or more of the bright needles, they'll explode, usually resulting in a kill. But the projectiles are pretty slow moving and easy to dodge, so it's really only effective at close range. However, that doesn't make it a bad weapon. It's not something that you'll carry with you through an entire mission, but when you do have those dense, tight gunfights, it really comes into its own and proves to be super fun and satisfying to use. The plasma pistol is also used by the Grunts as well as Jackals, and it fortunately operates in an entirely different way to the UNSC pistol. It's a high rate of fire weapon that expels energy rounds, which are particularly effective against shields, making it useful for Elites and Jackals. However, if you hold down the fire button, you can charge it up and unleash a high-powered round of energy that has some homing properties. Not only does it do more damage, but it completely eliminates an Elite's shields. There's a great dichotomy within it that really extends its value, while also helping it forge unique relationships with other weapons in the sandbox. The most obvious being with the UNSC pistol. Pop shields with a charged plasma pistol shot, and then pop heads with a single handgun shot. These weapons are very unique and feel alien while not being hard to grasp. Their eccentricities are easy to pass but still take some time to master, making for a great learning curve that rewards investment into these weapons. Having defended Sergeant Johnson's squad, Cortana calls in Foehammer, a UNSC pilot, for some support. As she approaches in a Pelican, more lifeboats from the Autumn crash on the surface. Foehammer drops off a Warthog so you can find those escape pods, and 2 Marines stay behind to jump in the vehicle with you. There are 3 different squads to find, so you take off, attempting to wrangle the Warthog and its strange controls. You don't use a trigger to accelerate, but rather push forward on the left stick and turn with the right stick. I don't have a problem with this control scheme as I'm so used to it, but I can definitely see how it could be awkward. It doesn't allow you to look around while you drive, forcing focus to always be in your immediate vicinity if you don't want to completely stop. The Warthog is also easy to flip over, but fortunately that goes both ways, as simply interacting with it while it's upside down will make it comically fling itself right way up. You soon make your way through a cave that seems to be a part of the installation, again teasing that curiosity by the vast size of these slate walls and finely detailed floors. The dim eeriness of this interior is highlighted by the abrasive metallic stabs of the music, underlined by a warbling wavy synth that alludes to the truth bubbling underneath the surface. Exiting out the other side of the hill, this level really comes to life. One of the few instances of horns blare away as you crest the hill and are given the opportunity to make contact with these 3 different UNSC squads in whatever order you want. To me, this is one of the definitive moments of the campaign. The fantastic music, rich sense of curiosity and mystery, and more open-ended design all come together really well. The less linear design may not seem too spectacular nowadays, but it was a much bigger deal in 2001. These larger spaces weren't unheard of, even the original Doom has some sprawling levels, but Halo actively emphasizes and encourages player-driven exploration, not just through level design but the narrative reoccurrence of that idea, with the clearly well thought out world only bolstering that. Despite all that, it's still a measured execution of those ideas and sensations. In trying to capture what this level ultimately does, they could have gone way bigger and way more open, and I believe they intended to, but I'm glad they didn't. It's really quite modular. Each squad is located in its own closed-off canyon that has a few entries/exits. This allows for a more tailored experience, with each little expedition having its own beginning, middle, and end. There are a few quiet moments making it to the crash site and taking in the scenery around you, then you come into contact with the soldiers and fight off any enemies that attack, before calling in Foehammer to pick up the survivors. This creates concrete, satisfying progression while still giving that exploratory urge room to breathe, all while making allowances for a unique combat scenario to play out within each instance. In one, you might be storming in on a Warthog as Covenant bear down on the troops you're trying to save, making for a much more action-packed, audacious fight. In another, Covenant squads may already be camped out in a structure, keeping an eye out for threats while the UNSC are huddled up beneath the surface of that same structure, keeping out of trouble. So this time, instead of barreling in, you got to be more careful as fires focus squarely on you, relying much more on the environment to cut off lines of sight and create more manageable encounters. These aren't mind-blowing differences, but they're ones that matter, that make whatever combination you choose to tackle the 3 objectives from feel complete and whole as individuals and a group. They show the versatility that such a solid gameplay backbone allows for. It's a great middle ground of player choice and leading level design that makes for a super fun experience. And I haven't even really touched on the presentation all that much yet. Just looking up at the ring extending beyond and above you and around you is fucking cool, man. The way the sunlight bleeds around objects is rich and provocative. Normal maps ascribe a good level of shadowing detail to surfaces, belying the rather simple geometry of the landscape. You come across these different structures which fire bolts of energy high into the sky, again clearly having an in-universe purpose and one you want to learn about. However, they also have a gameplay purpose, acting as a natural objective marker, as 2 of the UNSC groups are right by one, so you can look into the sky and use the bolts of energy to determine where to go if need be. The Warthog feels meaty and consequential, actually kicking up chunks of earth as the tires rip through, strewing it across the ground. Halo is also choosy about when you do and don't leave Chief's perspective. The intro cutscene starts in third person to create an establishing shot of the ring and give you some rough bearings. But when the other escape pods fly by later on, you stay in first person, because this new objective is meant to feel player-led. It occurs more naturally so that when you pursue them, it feels more holistically like an event that just happened to take place while you played. There's just so much done right here. I'm seriously in love with this level and its construction and design. As you rendezvous with the other soldiers, Cortana locates Captain Keyes via hacking into Covenant comms, finding out that he's being held on an enemy cruiser, the Truth and Reconciliation. It's 300 kilometers away, and so you hop on the Pelican with the final group of Marines and head there to retrieve him.
So how do we get inside the ship if it's in the air? The Corps issued me a rifle, not wings. There's a gravity...
Foehammer touches down after nightfall and you're dropped off along with some Marines and Sergeant Johnson. You can board the Covenant ship via a gravity lift beneath it, but there's a few hundred meters and plenty of Covenant between you and the lift to deal with. You start out with a sniper rifle and are encouraged to pick off enemies without alerting the others. Combat Evolved tries to insert stealth elements a few times and results are mixed. The most glaring issue is the lack of feedback. There are no official, explicit systems for stealth, and so judging when enemies can and can't see or hear you is really tough. Covenant are often grouped together, and so weaving between them to take them out is practically impossible. In this scenario, I peeked out behind cover while in the darkness and got spotted immediately. There just aren't enough allowances to make stealth a viable strategy across an entire encounter. At most, I found you'd get a few quick kills before it all kicks off. Stealth is more achievable through melee, however. Hitting an enemy in the back kills them instantly, and in some later levels you can find groups of sleeping grunts that you can covertly take out, leading you to have the actual upper hand in those situations. The melee in Halo 1 is pretty rough. There's some serious lead time before it actually connects, making timing feel very wonky, but you will eventually get used to it. There are some cool unique animations though, like flipping the pistol over after swinging it, or stabbing the loaded needles from the needler into your target. Despite its failings, I don't completely dislike how stealth manifests. It's such a crapshoot that I went into any attempt of stealth gameplay with very low expectations for results, and so any silent kill I pulled off I was happy with. It helps that you're so clearly equipped for loud combat, and so getting spotted doesn't result in awkward gunfights or attempts to flee, it just means you get to play normally. This little introduction does get you used to the sniper, a long-range, hyper-precise weapon that kills pretty much anything in one hit to the body, and some more powerful foes with a hit to the dome. It's incredibly user-friendly, there's practically no recoil, and the rate of fire is rather high. However, that does mean it feels a little weightless and thin in your digital hands. I don't know if the lack of recoil in some of these weapons is supposed to be an indicator of Chief's amplified athletic ability, but even if intended, I think it does some of these weapons a disservice. Fighting your way up this ridge and along cliff faces has a really fantastic momentum to it. Then the music kicks in with this gnarly, bouncy bass guitar, sharp keys and harmonizing vocals. This plays into the mood perfectly as you fight in the dark with the moon plastering the horizon behind you. It creates such a unique atmosphere that doesn't try and glorify the violence here, but rather make it seem a little cruel or sad, as you chase down fleeing grunts and wipe out platoons of Covenant. At the same time, the prominent, slightly reverbed snares are backed up by thumping toms, and later insistent hi-hats that fit right in with the clash of gunfire, making this violence seem inevitable. As you continue fighting, the AI of the Marines that are accompanying you add to the authenticity and believability. If you happen to take the left flank in one area, they'll push up the middle, giving you unrestricted lines of sight on many Covenant for easy picking. Additionally, UNSC soldiers will stand over Covenant corpses and shoot at them, not because their AI thinks they're still alive, but as an expression of their disdain for the aliens. As you progress, you see the Truth and Reconciliation looming over you, making for an intimidating but awesome image. You find the grav lift and deal with the Covenant forces before two hunters descend from the ship. Also known as Megalic Gollo, these are a collective of Lock Gollo worms that enhance their intelligence and strength by forming together. They have great defense owing to thick armor and a shield on one arm, while wielding a fuel rod cannon that fires large explosive rounds on the other. They can pose a real threat, but once you've identified that their backs are exposed, you can quickly bait them into lunging at you with their shield, giving you an opportunity to hammer the weakness while they recover. They often appear in pairs, and create a much more movement-based engagement rather than one centered primarily around firepower and weapon choice. If you're dealing with them while other Covenant are around, staying still to bait their melee attacks can prove fatal, as you're peppered with shots, making for an interesting and individual dynamic. After taking them out, you're left with no obstructions, and so step into the gravity lift to be taken inside the ship. You start out moving through corridors and intersections, taking out small groups of Covenant along the way, opening doors so the Marines can proceed. Combat echoes that of the Autumn with the tighter spaces, but this time with a Covenant theme. That means weapons like the Needler and Plasma Rifle get to shine. The Needler feels more at home with less room for movement, but is so ever present in this level that it gets a bit much. The Plasma Rifle is basically a fully automatic version of the Plasma Pistol, eroding shields very effectively, but you can't reload it. Once you're out of ammo, you gotta pick up something else. The Needler, however, can be reloaded. This weighs emphasis way more on the latter, and although it's fun to use, it feels like more of a novelty than something you want to be carrying with you the whole mission. But you ultimately have little choice in the matter just due to how few plasma rifles there are. Things get more interesting once you emerge into the docking bay and you're given more room to breathe and face some elites. As you ascend and get closer to keys, you walk through the different levels of this docking bay, which helps give a firmer sense of place and direction, stopping the ship from feeling like a mess of maze-like corridors, which retains that sense of mystery without letting it get out of hand and veer into confusion. You eventually find Keys locked up and must take down some invisible elites that wield energy swords. You free Keys and the Marines locked up with him, and he reveals what he overheard during his capture. The Covenant call this ring Halo, and it seems to have great religious significance to them, believing it to be a massive weapon. Through some hacking, Cortana discovers they're looking for Halo's control room, and if they're successful, they could end humanity as we know it. With that info, the new mission becomes to reach the control room before the enemy, so it's time to leave the ship. This mission doesn't feel all that substantial in terms of raw progression. There's not tons of story beats, but it still does some really important stuff. Primarily, it caps off an establishing arc. In terms of the Covenant, we know very little. We're made to understand them to some degree, but more pressing is that we understand the threat they are to humanity. You first encounter them on home turf, so to speak, and slowly see them take it over. Then you evacuate to an unknown object and see that their presence is already firmer in this foreign place as well. Then finally, in this mission, you infiltrate their territory, the cruiser, and are surrounded by the bulbous, shiny purples while Covenant troops stand around every corner. Among these three wildly different circumstances, they're an ever-present threat. You completely understand why you must fight against them, and you truly feel embroiled within this conflict. A similar sort of arc exists for the ring as well. It starts out more removed as you merely happen to be near it, then you land on it and get a better idea of what it is before finally getting some more consequential intel in the ship, once again letting the player naturally develop a relationship with it and the air of mystery that fogs up the path forward. As I said about the last level, your objectives are a bit lower stakes and more reactionary for these first three missions. You're not trying to actively save all of humanity yet, merely getting your bearings. But with this reveal of Halo's purpose, now that overarching goal comes into focus and more narrative investment is built. It's not a terribly complex setup, but it's a really well executed one, and plays into the thrust of gameplay, being exploration and combat, to make the gameplay, and by extension the player's agency, feel connected to the narrative in a meaningful way. We also learn of the Covenant's motivation, that being Halo's significance to their religion and its role as a weapon. This connection brings to light the purpose of the references made to real-world religions. The ring's theological importance to the Covenant tells us that although the Covenant are a group of alien races, their religion still operates much like those from the player's lifetime. What the Covenant broadly do in the name of their faith can be read as a comment or observation on how religion can manifest. The Covenant, by the way, is referencing the Holy Covenant, a number of agreements made between God and man in the three Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. This may be a reference we all already understood, but the firm establishment of parallels between this fictional world and its religion and our world and religions is what's important. Implementing these parallels help lay the groundwork for some of the game's most prevalent themes, so it's necessary for the game to establish this. That groundwork comes into focus here, as I believe the ever-present idea of mystery builds a relationship with religion and faith within Halo 1's narrative. Faith, in effect, compensates for mystery. It attempts to explain or help us come to terms with that which we don't or can't know, that which is mysterious. Most pressingly, this is done with death and what rests on the other side of mortality. The Covenant are feverishly pursuing control of Halo, even though they don't truly know how to control it, doing so in the name of their faith. The idea and theme of mystery becomes linked with the religious motivation of the Covenant. As such, both of these themes are enriched through their association, urging the player to continue to think and ponder about what's going on here. It also allows the Covenant's threat and goal to be easier to grasp, enhancing players' motivation and purpose. Understanding the Covenant's motivation also sheds some light on the meaning of the ship's name. The Truth and Reconciliation is named after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a restorative justice body established in South Africa after the end of apartheid in 1996. The commission would bear witness to accounts of human rights violations committed under apartheid, sometimes granting amnesty to perpetrators and reparations and rehabilitation to victims. The name is appropriate for the ship as there's a number of different races on board working together. There's also this idea that, much like the Commission, the cruiser is an arbiter and facilitator of truth. That's how confident the Covenant are in their religious doctrine and beliefs. The ship's name is also the mission's name, which obviously applies to what we're doing here, learning the truth about Halo and the Covenant's motivation, while also reconciling with Keyes. There's also some cool character stuff here. I think. I believe there's some insight to be drawn about Master Chief's character, but I can't tell if that's intentional or circumstantial and convenient. I haven't really touched on his character because there's really very little to say. He's a tough guy with a gruff voice who dispenses one-liners every now and then. That's not to say personality can't be derived from that. I think he's taciturn but not unsure, emanating a quiet confidence, but that's not much to build a compelling character on. However, as you retrace your steps throughout the ship to leave with Keyes, you walk past all the lifeless bodies that you left behind as the hollow ambience of the Truth and Reconciliation hums away. While doing this, I couldn't help but think of that earlier section, where the music intonated a tragic note to the combat. It also made me think of Master Chief's past. You see, the candidates for the Spartan 2 program would be identified as children, around age 6 I believe, so that they could grow with their genetic enhancements and be indoctrinated to follow the orders given by the UNSC. This was a secret program, so they would then be kidnapped from their parents and replaced with a clone that the UNSC knew would die not too long after their creation. So the families of the stolen children wouldn't become suspicious, thinking their child had died and not been stolen. The candidates would then go through the aforementioned training, which was incredibly grueling. Having that context adds weight to the moments I've mentioned above about this mission. Coming through the ship the first time, the music's thumping and you've got good reason to fight. They took Captain Keyes. But on the way back, Master Chief's potential for violence becomes more apparent. His sole purpose is to kill and destroy. He walks past these bodies with the same steady pace as before. Those scant few personality traits are the product of immense pain and manipulation. His brevity becomes unnerving and more tragic. The reason I'm unsure if this is at all intentional is that it's dependent on lore that isn't present in this first game. It's spoken about in one of the first Halo books, but I have no idea if all that backstory was understood when crafting this level. But regardless, I think there's some merit to what I've talked about even without the backstory, and while it's not too thoroughly explored, it is there to some extent and adds a bit of much needed depth to Master Chief's character. But the time for subtle, poignant character moments is over. Foehammer isn't able to approach the ship for evac, so you gotta commandeer a Covenant dropship and get the fuck out of here. Everyone boards the dropship and Keyes takes off, free from the Covenant's two-fingered, two-thumbed mitts. A group of Pelicans approach the shore of one of the islands on Halo. Through her hacking of the Covenant network, Cortana found that a map room called the Silent Cartographer is somewhere under this island, which should be able to lead us to the ring's control room. It's our mission to find this map room. The Pelicans touch down and you and the UNSC troops jump out onto the beach, storming the Covenant so you can make it deeper into the island, all while the main theme blares right behind you.
Go, go, go!
Right after having the Covenant threat well and truly realised and imparted upon you, after getting a more concrete mission that imbues your steps with purpose, you get unleashed upon them, Marines and bullets alike screaming around you. You've been made to feel like the underdog, and the fight that ensues is intense and invigorating, even if it's not all that remarkable, strictly speaking. You play with more tenacity and momentum. You're about to use the Covenant's own information to beat them to the punch and win this fucking war. And that's a perfect note to start the Silent Cartographer on. There's not just the gameplay and effectively incorporated layers of mystery driving you forward, but also the narrative motivation, to beat the odds and come out on top. The music can't be understated here either. You really get to hear the bulk of the main theme as you fight, and it's timed to naturally coincide with the arc of gameplay. You hop out of the Pelican right as the strings get more tense and jolted.
Go, go, go!
Building up as you get closer to the Covenant. Then it breaks into a dramatic bridge accentuated by drum crashes as you get up close and personal with your enemies, combat now feeling louder as you can hear the grunts screaming. As you start to overcome that initial conflict, the song settles back into its main theme, giving a second to breathe and recharge your shields before amping back up again so you can get back out there and finish them off. The music here feeds into gameplay and absolutely elevates the sequence to a whole other level. It's getting your blood pumping just as much as any other FPS OST, all while sounding completely unique, feeling tailored to this world and this narrative, not to the commonly accepted tropes of what makes music epic or grand. I just don't have the knowledge to talk about the music from a theoretical perspective. I can only really say how I feel it contributes as a piece of the experience. If you'd like to understand the theory of what makes Halo's OST so unique and distinct, go watch this video by Adam O'Dell on the subject. It's really great and gave me a new appreciation for it while generally teaching me a lot. So, back to the game. Once the beach has been secured, some warthogs are dropped off and you're free to explore the island however you'd like. This, like Mission 2, Halo, is one of the more structurally open levels. Even though there is more flexibility in the structure here, there's still being keen attention given to level design. The Warthog is dropped on the other side of a large structure, cutting off your line of sight from the beach and forcing you to look ahead of you, with the vehicle itself facing that same direction as it lands, nudging you that way while not ruling out the opposite direction, and much like that second mission, it's doing all this without objective markers. You hop in the hog and round the corner, finding some Covenant dawdling along the grass. They're surprised to see you easily eliminated and ostensibly not serving any purpose considering the objective isn't along this piece of shore. You don't get anything for killing them. Which is wrong. Nathan from 12 seconds ago is a fucking fool who didn't know what they were talking about, as these Covenant in fact serve multiple purposes. So don't worry, I've thrown old Nathan out and I say good riddance. Purpose 1. This island is important to the Covenant's objective regarding the ring, and so naturally they have patrols like these along it to keep it secure. Purpose 2. Their lack of purpose is their purpose. The game's stoking your sense of curiosity again. Once you take them out and discover that there's no material reward, you begin to understand that Halo is becoming more player-driven after the much more linear third mission. What's smart about this is that it's presented without comment. If you're already keen to explore, you'll stop, have the firefight, and have a good look around, aware of the freedom at play. If you're not thinking about exploration, you may stop, have the firefight, and pick up what the game's putting down, glomming onto the less structured approach to this mission and island. And finally, if you have no interest in exploring, you likely won't stop at all, instead continuing around the next corner, finding the objective you're looking for with no wasted time or misconceptions. Halo could have had Cortana chime in as you first came across these jackals and grunts, maybe saying, "It looks like they didn't expect to see us here. It's not technically our mission, but we should try and eliminate as many Covenant on the island as we can." That would still communicate the ethos of this mission, but would leave the third group of people, those who don't stop at all, with the wrong impression, leading them to waste time searching for Covenant they don't actually need to kill. Instead, more subtle, minimalist and restrained design is employed to give you what you need to discern this mission's flexibility and make your experience here feel driven by your desires and choices. But that's not all. These Covenant serve a third and final purpose. These Covenant are the equivalent to coins in a Mario game. The coins serve a gameplay purpose, giving you a higher score and another life once you've got 100 of them, which effectively disguises them so they can serve a design purpose, telling the player when or where to jump to make progress. These enemies are the same. They provide the opportunity to fight, whether by shooting or splatting, and reassure you that you're going the right way. A little trail of breadcrumbs essentially. This is such a small part of this mission in the grand scheme of things, but it sets the mood for your playthrough of it, easing you into this structure and approach to make for a smoother, more rewarding experience. Not far ahead, you see an artificial opening in the cliff, tied with the now familiar architecture of whoever or whatever built this thing. You deal with the Covenant guarding the entrance and head inside. However, you're locked out by an elite after descending some stairs. Funnily enough, you can actually kill that elite through the door, but unfortunately that doesn't unlock it. It's time to find a security override for the door, a vague objective that's enough to push us forward without being too directed, in keeping with the mission's spirit. With some exploring, you'll find a path leading further into the island, finding more remnants of artificial ring structures and 2 hunters chilling out. They've already taken the lives of a few UNSC Marines, but luckily you're able to avenge them by using their pistols to one-shot both of the hunters. Yes, the pistol one-shots the hunters. I don't know why the UNSC are worried about the Covenant controlling this planet-sized weapon we're walking around on. Just start duct taping pistols together and handing them out and we should be good to go. You actually come across 2 overshields here, which when picked up beef up your shields temporarily. You can also find active camouflage in much the same way. These don't really change the experience but merely act as permission slips almost. The overshield gives you license to go guns blazing with little regard for defense, which can be pretty fun, and the invisibility helps the awkward stealth become more viable, and taking out elites with backsmacks is really satisfying. They help focus gameplay in one specific direction for a bit, mixing it up and allowing some encounters to play into the tone of that mission's section, much like how this level started action heavy, with these overshields encouraging that. You soon come to another cave opening, allowing access deeper into the ring. I love that these areas that reveal the ring's secrets are all underground, making gameplay mirror that idea of delving deeper to get to the bottom of things. The gameplay helps immerse you into the mystery as spaces become darker, slimmer, and a bit more complicated to navigate. Combat becomes more jumpy and hectic, which would be demonstrated by the 2 hunters that ambush you here, if, again, the pistol wasn't so outrageously powerful. You shut down the security system, and as you head back to the cartographer's location, you're made aware of a UNSC dropship that's made a crash landing. It's a reminder that the Covenant threat is still very real and dangerous, and also an excuse to give you another Warthog and introduce you to the rocket launcher. The rocket launcher really isn't all that complex. A good way to blow shit up, but not having that much long-term value. Ammo for it is so scarce that trying to save it for the right occasion really just limits you to one weapon, which could make for a compelling constraint I suppose, but I prefer having my fun with it quickly before dumping it for something more reliable. Finally able to pass through the previously locked door, you come across a vertical shaft the chief approaches the edge of, kicking a plasma grenade down just to see how far it falls. Just like the Doom Marines, this is a reminder of the enormity and anomality of this structure. If this is all a weapon, just imagine what the Covenant could do with it. This sets you up for the final chunk of the level, and allows us to look back upon the Silent Cartographer's structure. If need be, these objectives could all be very simply rearranged to play out one after the other. Cortana could say she also found data saying the Covenant know how to operate the ring security systems, and then boom, you no longer have to find the locked door. Unlocking it could become the first goal after storming the beach. But that more traditional and pedestrian structure is abandoned as it doesn't serve the thematic purpose of this level. Exploration and curiosity feed into mystery and secrecy, and emphasizing that after the reveal that this is a weapon and the Covenant's effective 3 mission introduction makes the lingering mystery take on a more sinister tone and dangerous implication. This wasn't really done in FPSs at the time, even less so in the less sophisticated console market. Of course, this is still a video game at the end of the day, and these structural shakeups also keep gameplay varied and diverse. Some of that diversity coming from the switch between interior and exterior combat. The more wary and careful gameplay returns from earlier as you navigate Halo's hallways. The looming strings capitalize on this feeling to amplify it even more. You'll probably find yourself relying more on your radar, which I haven't actually mentioned yet. It's pretty simple stuff really. Red dots are enemies and faded red dots are enemies above or below you. That simple information and its modest 15-meter range help it inform your combat decisions without defining them, which I think is a sign of a good radar. You're never left staring at it instead of what's in front of you. As you look around the installation, enemy dropships show up, with the UNSC troops outside stressing that you speed things up, as they won't be able to hold the Covenant out forever. You weave through similar looking hallways and courtyards, all the while descending further and getting more and more turned around. You eventually find the map and Cortana's able to identify the location of the control room. You're unable to make contact with keys, and the Marines are still fighting up top, so you rush to make your way out. As you do so, the main theme kicks in, much like in the beach battle, bringing things full circle to capture a feeling of approaching finality to the mission. This time there's some electric guitar incorporated into it, and it makes for some damn enjoyable shooting. That being said, it does feel like the wires are crossed a little here. I did get lost for a bit, which seemed intentional to make it feel like you're wasting time when you're trying to get back to the Marines ASAP. But at the same time, the music encourages forward momentum and awesome moments. So lamely wandering around trying to find your way while it plays in the background feels irritating and no fun. Eventually though, Master Chief makes it to the top and is picked up by Foehammer. The Pelican follows Cortana's coordinates, taking you deep underground, hoping to take the Covenant off guard. It's time to find the control room.
Roger that. We'll be able to find our way to the control center from here.
Good luck. Foehammer out.
Foehammer drops you off and you head towards the coordinates on foot. You move through a few rooms before exiting into a large snowy canyon with a bridge suspended across it. There's not all that much that happens narratively in this mission, and the structure and design isn't as compelling as the previous mission, but it acts as a moody level that helps get you ingratiated to this new environment, and especially the ring's internal workings. Those internal workings can be pretty formulaic as you fight through multiple identical rooms, often acting as the transition to an elevator or exterior gameplay sequence. As a consequence, combat can become repetitive. Although the enemies are fun to fight, there are really only 4 types of Covenant and the Hunters are pretty rare. Variants of Elites shake this up a bit more, but these encounters can still feel very routine as you progress through the level. That being said, the monotony does allow for a few unique things. As you trudge through these similar rooms, you come to memorize their layouts, and as such you can exercise stealth more effectively, with the low-key, darkly plucky and computerized, that is exact and precise, music only accentuating those moments. On top of that, it becomes arduous and a little exhausting. The ring's size becomes more present and pressing. This place isn't meant to be explored by an unknown visitor. If you knew this place back to front like its creators, it would be much simpler, but as it is, you're clearly out of place and this installation is a complete unknown, with Halo sustaining the mystery even through its mundanity. Now, although I do think those repeat rooms wear out their welcome, this level still has plenty to love. As mentioned, the structure is linear, but it manages to keep some of the magic of the last mission bottled up. When you walk out onto that first bridge, you can look down to the canyon's surface and you will find yourself making your way across that snowy ground later on. You're regularly able to see later parts of the mission as you make progress, and it creates a strong connective thread that runs throughout the whole thing. It obscures that linearity a bit and continues to make the ring feel like a fleshed out, well-considered and believable aspect of the world. In fact, Halo does that well across the whole experience. It introduces and explains concepts enough to get you on board without spoiling the alluring sense of mystery that's so integral to the game. It also avoids indenturing you with low-valued lore and details that could bog the experience down and bore you. It's not tripping over itself to sell you on the legitimacy of its world and narrative. It smartly relies on the gameplay to handle the brunt of that pitch. With these larger spaces comes a deeper focus on vehicle-based combat. You get the chance to use a single unit Covenant ground vehicle called the Ghost and the Banshees we saw in Mission 2. The Ghost is great for maneuverability, and its projectile-based turrets, rather than the UNSC hit-scan weapons, make for a distinct style of combat within it. That need to lead shots and essentially strafe only accentuates how these Covenant vehicles differ from their UNSC counterparts, with these gulfs and equivalents making up for the rather low number of vehicles that you can use. Near the middle you get access to the Scorpion, a UNSC tank. It's of course very powerful and sluggish, but suffers the most from the dual-stick control scheme. You can't aim the cannon without also turning the whole thing, meaning you gotta post up and shoot everything before moving on. That may be more faithful to how tanks operate in real life, but it only slows the pace of gameplay down even more. As you near the control room, you help out a UNSC squad along the way before making your final push via a Banshee, or a much more protracted fight along the ground. You enter the cavernous, suspended control center and jack Cortana into the terminal. She's bestowed with all the knowledge that we've been wondering about, and of course Master Chief's first question is how can this weapon be used against the enemy? However, this isn't a strictly brute force weapon, but something much more sophisticated. Cortana, upon learning of its purpose, is too panicked to fully convey it to you, just saying that the Covenant found something horrible buried here. She insists you hurry up and stop Captain Keyes from accessing the weapons cache he's searching for, which he overheard talk about from some elites while locked up on the Truth and Reconciliation. And so Master Chief takes off, leaving Cortana inside Halo's system, hoping he's not already too late. .343 Guilty Spark starts off in an eerie forest beset by dense fog, with Covenant retreating, running from something. Foehammer informs us that this is the last place the Captain was detected, so now you gotta find him. Enemies are sparse throughout the forest, and discerning the way forward can be tough thanks to the fog. Distorted radio chatter eases in and out amongst static, with the distinct rainforest ambience enforcing the slower and carefully curious atmosphere. Whatever's going on here is important, because the elites, the highest ranking Covenant we've seen thus far, are nowhere to be found, either having been evacuated or eliminated entirely. This leaves just grunts and jackals, and combat feels sparse and unfair when it's just these two enemy types, the gameplay informing mood in its own way. You have to climb over the roots of these mammoth trees to progress, with this area feeling unequipped for your traversal, making you feel further out of place. This all contrasts the size and scope of combat from the previous mission. The Banshees, tanks, wraiths, rocket launchers and snipers have been left behind, and now you're back to the standard pistol and assault rifle against whatever it is that did this. You enter an opening to the installation and descend down via an elevator, cutting you off from the outside world. As you look around, you see that the entire place is in disarray, broken equipment idly spitting sparks onto the floor, drawing your eye to the bloodstains that coat it. You don't find groups of Covenant patrolling a room to defend it, but rather find them huddled together, jumping in surprise when they see you. On top of that, progress is less structured, having to platform up Covenant debris to move onward instead of using the automatic doors we're used to. It's all so intriguing and engrossing. Halo really uses everything at its disposal to execute this shift, and goddamn does it pay off. There's also a really effective ramping up of the environmental storytelling. You start off with the initial room and its broken equipment. Then past that you see some sort of biomass liquid stuff dripping from the ceiling, and further on a small corridor absolutely caked with the neon blue and purple Covenant blood. Halo isn't a particularly gory game, and so all of this really sticks out, to the point where it feels like something Cortana would make some sort of comment about. But of course she's not here. The person who's relayed every directive, and the only one who really has all the info, is gone, and that silence only amplifies everything at play. You soon enter another room and come across a UNSC Marine, screaming at you to stay back while shooting away. His nerves have made his aim atrocious as he insists he won't be turned into, quote, one of those things. After experiencing everything you have thus far, this is what breaks the silence, the manic rambling of someone tortured by what they've seen. Master Chief is doing what he's doing to try and protect humanity, but it can't be protected here. You just have to walk past those affected and hope you can make sure they're the last ones affected, further cementing motivation for him and the player. Deeper into the facility you find some UNSC casualties, and Chief takes a look at one of the recordings saved on a Marine's helmet.
Why do we always have to listen to this old stuff, Sarge?
Watch your mouth, son. This stuff is your history. It should remind you grunts what we're fighting to protect.
Which is weird, right? I mean, look at it. Something scrambled the insides.
What's that? Plasma scoring?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there was an accident, you know, friendly fire or something?
Hold still! Hold still! Let him have it! Sergeant, we're surrounded. God damn it, Jenkins! Fire your weapon!
There are too many, Sarge!
Don't even think about it, Marine.
Oh, this is loco!
Get back here, Marine! That's an order! Jenkins!
This is what Cortana feared had been found by the Covenant. The Flood, parasitic organisms that infect sentient life forms at incredible rates. And if there's one thing that's become a lot scarier in the past couple years, it's the idea of infectious organisms. All that you can do is try and get the fuck out of here, and that sets the tone for how you'll treat the Flood. But before we get into that, there's more ground to cover in terms of themes and religious references. With this little reveal sequence, we're put into the perspective of a person other than Master Chief for the first and only time. Through cutscenes we do leave Chief's perspective, but we never enter someone else's, save for this instance. And in that instance, the person is overwhelmed and ultimately doomed by what they face. This resurfaces that idea of Master Chief being a saviour figure. This theme is inherently ever present as gameplay demonstrates how Chief is constantly coming to the rescue. But the switch in perspective swaps that from being a passive thematic element to an active one, bringing it back to mind more directly so that it sticks out, helping you internalize it more. So as for the Flood, the name The Flood is referring to the cataclysmic flood from the story of Noah from the Bible, that which unflinchingly sweeps across the globe and destroys all, much how the Flood from Halo would due to their parasitic efficiency. In this story, Noah creates a covenant with God, an agreement, once the flood has subsided, guaranteeing that God would never destroy all life with a flood again. This ties into what the appearance of the flood ultimately reveals. Through ignorance and a sort of dogmatic determination, the Covenant have ironically unleashed the flood that will consume all living things, proving to do exactly the opposite of what their name implies. The Covenant have a dogmatic insistence about their religious beliefs, making for an immovable, unquestioning faith that can be easily manipulated to become ignorance or naivete. This does let them confidently bridge the gap of mystery and answer questions that ultimately have none, as mentioned earlier. But when they reach the other side, all that waits for them is an apocalyptic force, the Flood, proving that acting so boldly in service of their ignorance could prove to be fatal to not just them, but all sentient existence. This is what Halo's narrative is about, the danger of acting under ignorance versus, as we'll see later, acting under truth. The religious references don't just make for a compelling set of symbology to run throughout the game, but act as the thread that binds the constant discussion of faith, mystery, ignorance, and truth. It also helps tie these ideas to the real world, making sure we understand that Halo isn't making this point just within its own universe, it applies to our world as well. This point is driven home constantly for the rest of the game, as the Flood are a representation of the Covenant's hubris and mistakes, and we'll be fighting the Flood regularly going forward. So let's see how they manifest within gameplay. They're immediately an entirely different beast than the Covenant in that regard. Your first impression comes from the basic infection forms. They swarm around you, fogging up the radar with a red mist. The bulk of them can be taken care of with the assault rifle, being quite fragile, but getting rid of every last one of them is finicky and frustrating, and so you'll often be followed by a trail of 2 or 3 because it ain't time to get pedantic. Then you come across the combat forms. These forms have appropriated Covenant and UNSC bodies, in the process inheriting their intelligence, allowing them to fire weapons. They're incredibly fast and aren't afraid to get up in your face and smack you around. At the same time, they don't flinch like the Covenant do. The little strategies you've developed so far just won't play in this fight. This forces combat to be panicked, exhausting, and rushed. It feels like you have to be sustaining fire at all times to deal with them, and so reloading becomes a much larger burden than previously. At the same time, you don't even know where to shoot. They have things that kind of resemble heads, or rather, where the infection initially took place, but aiming at them doesn't seem to make much difference. The gnarled knots of flesh give no tells of a weakness, and how long it takes to kill each one feels arbitrary, not to mention that some will just get up again after seemingly being dead. Everything about gameplay is turned on its head by the Flood, driving home how dangerous they and what they represent are. The Covenant threat was built fantastically over 3 missions, but it takes the Flood just one to clearly be the more pertinent enemy. That becomes even clearer as you make your way back towards the entrance of the facility. You see groups of Covenant get decimated by the parasites and you feel kinda bad for them. Now, the Flood aren't just sold by the way they affect gameplay, but also how they're presented and the details therein. The combat forms are dominated by sickly, green-yellow growths that have overtaken the host body, and remnants of those bodies can be seen underneath. They have open wounds and limbs augmented with additional growths in the form of claws. There may also be some visual ties to the story of Noah as well. Some painted interpretations of the legend, where people are seen desperately trying to escape the rising tide, bear some resemblance to the Flood. The naked bodies strewn throughout the Great Flood by Michelangelo from 1509 is not too unlike the large groups of Flood that storm you in this level. The Deluge by Dutch painter Joachim Uterval from 1595 has the bodies of its subjects contorted into dramatic, awkward positions, creating silhouettes that look unnatural and painful, akin to the deformed shapes the flood take on. Finally, and most concretely, there's The Flood of Noah and Companions from 1911 by French artist Léon Commer. The mass of sodden bodies interspersed with animals are piled up, those who've already drowned laying lifelessly in the water at their feet, while the rain relentlessly continues. It can be hard to discern where bodies start and end, moulding them into a loosely defined mass of flesh that defies biological function, becoming a one and many at the same time. The Flood are the same, as they're a hive mind made up of many different units. There's also the sickly yellow-green tint in skin tone, finding parity within the different Flood forms. The lack of flinching plays into the Flood's carelessness. They are base beings which have but a single purpose: infect. The fact that they use both Covenant and UNSC weapons is significant. They have no allegiance or ally. They make no delineation and seem to take little notice of the other Flood around them. There's not a semblance of coordination or cooperation. They're simply an unstoppable force. You may temporarily keep them at bay, but quiet moments are few and far between, soon interrupted by more shambling drones. Continuing to fight is unsustainable and escape seems slim, but you fortunately come across a shotgun on a dead body. This is the key to managing the Flood. They may not flinch at assault rifle fire, but they crumble under the stopping power the shotgun delivers. Having a solution is a glorious feeling, and Halo's aware of how essential it is, regularly supplying you with ammo as you retreat. It has a generous 12 bullet capacity, which plays into the larger investment that the Flood cause reloading to become. The interrupted infrastructure that on your way in asked for more stunted progression becomes a bigger thorn in your side, complicating escape to keep the pressure on. You finally get to the elevator to leave, and Fohammer picks your signal back up as you ascend. She's gonna touch down to pick you and a UNSC squad that's on the surface up, so now it's time to venture back into the forest. What was eerie becomes debilitating, the fog again obscuring your vision and the path forward. Luckily, it's not too tough to soldier on. Although you've been trained up until this point to directly engage with enemies and dispatch them, you quickly learned during this mission that the Flood will follow you, and it's best to push forward and turn around to fire some shots every now and then. As you proceed onwards, some of the installation's sentinels follow with some small orb in tow. Once things have calmed down, the monitor introduces itself as 343 Guilty Spark. Its job is to stop the Flood from escaping the ring, and it needs your help to do so. So, Master Chief is teleported away with it, taking us to the library.
Come, this way.
Chief, I've lost your signal! Where'd you go? Chief! Chief!
Guilty Spark informs us that to help stop the Flood we must find the Index, which is presumably in this massive area. This kicks off the worst mission of the game. That's generally how people feel about this level, and for good reason. The entire mission consists of following Guilty Spark while holding off the Flood, which relentlessly follow you and allow for few breaks. It's strikingly linear in the worst way. Not only is there only one way forward and close to zero opportunities to explore, but you don't even get to dictate the pace, as you often have to wait for 343 to open a door or something similar. Escort missions already largely suck, but this one sucks even more because you're the one being escorted. It's not just the gameplay that's repetitive and tedious, but the environments and level design as well. You're literally walking through identical areas. I can use footage from any spot in the mission and you can't tell how far in I am. The gameplay woes are made worse by the shotgun. Last mission, it was great, a much appreciated way to stave off the enemy, but it's the only sustainable solution to dealing with the parasites, and so you have to rely on it for the whole level, as it's easy to get overwhelmed and killed by the hordes of Flood when using less effective weaponry. As I am wont to do, when I see something in a game that isn't fun, I insist on trying to see how that could be intentional and what's being said through that, because apparently I can't just accept that something is poorly designed. There are a few things I picked up when looking at the library from that angle. Because you spend so long fighting the Flood, you also begin to notice some smaller details which further back up their characterization. They don't jump out of the way of grenades, for example. There's no sense of self-preservation, and in their pure instinct to pursue you, sticking them can be detrimental, as they may very well get close and explode in your face. Much of combat thus far feels like you're exercising your will upon the Covenant, someone so powerful that you'll beat the inordinate odds. But here that dynamic is flipped. Combat is now exhausting and you're the one being hounded and chased. You've been replaced as the dominant force, and the gameplay communicates that. These gameplay aspects are then accented by the music. It languishes and subsists, ebbing and flowing in and out of prominence. It occasionally lashes out through the introduction of drums, but unlike much of the soundtrack, there's little spectacle. It's an ever-present drone. It can't be shaken and shouldn't be ignored, just like the Flood themselves. They also carry on that idea of unwavering dedication, which the Covenant have through their religious beliefs, instead being applied to the Flood's purpose, to infect. They never falter or flinch. Focus lands squarely on spreading the parasite in service of the central mind that controls them. What really makes me believe that the designers knew what they were doing is 343 Guilty Spark. Every now and then he'll make some chatter, and he manages to say precisely the worst thing for the situation. Like acting surprised that you came so unequipped for the mission at hand, or insisting that you explore the impressive research facilities of the ring later on, as though you'd ever want to see this fucking place again. Within the universe, Guilty Spark is a robot AI thing. They probably don't have a sense of humour, but the writers do, and this is them acknowledging what they've done. In addition, there's the level chapters, one being, wait, it gets worse. Beyond that, there's little story content here, but it does have some value. You'll learn some details about how the Flood functioned through 343's exposition, and that this installation was built specifically to study them. They were preserved here intentionally. They'll also mention that mass sterilization protocols may need to be performed, and that they were studied within this installation. These tidbits, combined with Guilty Spark's condescension and smarminess, really make you hate them, and continue to build on the mystery of the ring, giving you some half answers about its function and history. You finally make it to the index and retrieve it, although 343 promptly snatches it, as it mustn't be in the hands of something that can be infected. With the key secured, you're teleported off to activate the ring. All in all, the library is very successful. It does exactly what it intends to. The problem is that it intends to prod, goad, frustrate and punish via dull design, monotonous gameplay and humorous but cruel writing. I think some of that can be implemented in a way that's still tolerable, but restraint is required. In fact, that's best seen in the previous mission. Much of my observations around what this mission's design says and imparts upon the player is already pulled off by the last level in a much shorter amount of time. The library pulls off what it intends to, but those intentions are fundamentally misguided.
Which means that any organism with sufficient mass and
Chief and Guilty Spark are spat out into the control room, and begin using the index to reactivate the ring. Cortana, still within the terminal, cuts in, stopping the process. The foreshadowing by 343 last mission begins to make sense as Cortana explains the ring's purpose. Yes, activating its defenses will destroy the Flood, but it will do so by eliminating their food source, which is all life in the galaxy. We obviously don't want that to happen, so now we're not only up against the Flood and Covenant, but also the ring itself, as Guilty Spark sicks the Sentinels on us. After taking care of them, Cortana devises a plan. In order to stop the ring from being activated, it's gotta be destroyed. An explosion big enough to take some essential systems offline, and a large ship's fusion reactor exploding will do the job. So she starts on finding the Pillar of Autumn's location. In the meantime, taking out 3 generators that are located within the surrounding canyons will require they be repaired before Halo's fired, so dealing with them should buy us some time. The same obsessive drive seen within the Covenant and the Flood reveals itself within Master Chief with this beginning scene. The Covenant's dogmatic dedication led to ignorance that set the Flood free. Master Chief's dogmatic dedication to following orders given to him leads to acting under ignorance in much the same way, almost resulting in the death of all life. The Covenant's devotion uses religious connotations and themes to explore the idea of acting under ignorance, where Master Chief's uses a militaristic theme. His indoctrination within the Spartan program robbed him of agency, becoming subservient and almost programmed to follow orders. That's become his instinct, even if they're from an unverified source like 343 Guilty Spark. That plays into ideas of a soldier's role within war. Are they merely a pawn to be ordered around by someone who's insulated from the direct threat these conflicts pose? Does that sort of dehumanizing strategy inevitably come into conflict with a soldier's free will? naturally leading to ill-informed decisions and even more unnecessary bloodshed. These implications only really arise when privy to Master Chief's backstory, so they aren't the main focus of his character. That's ultimately only something we can draw from the narrative when looking at it in retrospect. The main character point here is him taking back some control, defying orders once he has the truth thanks to Cortana, and working in service of that. Our objective has changed repeatedly over the campaign as we learn more and more about the mystery surrounding the ring, but now, with the truth, our end objective is solidified and won't fundamentally change because operating under the truth is what the story is conclusively positioning as the right thing to do. With that final objective decided upon, the level opens up as you re-emerge into the frigid canyons, night having fallen. This mission progresses much in the same way Assault on the Control Room did, letting you explore wide open but ultimately confined environments in a linear progression. The feeling of momentum from Mission 5 returns as well. One of the ever-present mysteries so far has been answered and has coincided with reuniting with Cortana, all while finally giving you a final objective to strive towards. You've also experienced the entire weapon and vehicle sandbox of the game, and that experience in conjunction with the fact that you're traversing familiar locations makes your gameplay feel more confident and diverse after the slog that was fighting the Flood. To help preserve this and get the player into the right mindset, Covenant remain the only foes you fight while you take down the first generator. Then, as you make your way to the second, the Flood return. The reintroduction is a welcome one as they aren't the sole focus of gameplay, and having to contend with both factions at once creates interesting combat scenarios, as well as cool narrative adjacent moments like seeing the two groups fight across a pair of bridges, a sort of ironic moment as the Covenant's blind religious fanaticism may well spell their own doom. This also shows a consistent care taken to make the world feel alive and lived in, with other details like the ransacked battlefields or installation doors falling apart as they eke open, only demonstrating that further. While heading to the third generator, Cortana locates the Autumn, but Keyes' neural implants are ultimately still needed to trigger the explosion, so a detour will have to be taken. Just as you enter the canyon holding the third generator, some much needed moments of peace and quiet are awarded to you. As you look at the Flood and Covenant fighting in the snowy field in front of you, you're given a chance to take a deep breath and prepare for the long final stretch of the game that composes the rest of the experience from this moment on. This has happened a few times, from the end of Truth and Reconciliation that completes the establishment of the Covenant, to the reveal of the Flood in 343 Guilty Spark, to where we stand now. The ground is littered with enemies, and making it to the final generator alive is generally tough with so much firepower on your tail. The Covenant were inside the first generator room, the Flood the second, and fittingly, the Sentinels from the Ring are in the third. You deal with them and take the final generator out of commission. Finding a ride to Keyes will be too time consuming, so Cortana taps into the Ring's teleportation grid, taking a risk and beaming you and her the closest you can get to the captain's location.
Something tells me I'm not gonna like this.
But I'm pretty sure I can pull it from your suit without permanently damaging your shields. Needless to say, I think we should only try this once.
Do it.
Through the Covenant network, Cortana discovers that the alien collective were directed to abandon Halo as soon as the Flood were found. They now fear the Flood will repair the Truth and Reconciliation and use it to leave the Ring, so the two groups are fighting over it. Keyes happens to be on the same cruiser, and so you begin searching for him. He chimes in over the radio, urging you not to find him in a strained, croaky voice. The ship is filled with holes, and so you soon find yourself navigating the ground below, and the Covenant Flood battles that inhabit the dark environment, lit up only by the fluorescent pools of green coolant that spilled out of the ship. Much like 2 Betrayals, you're having to contend with both enemies at once as they also fight each other, recontextualizing these encounters through the environment. The combat from the last mission involved both foes but leaned closer to how fighting the Covenant felt, and the combat in this mission goes the other way, leaning more into the rhythm of gameplay the Flood necessitate. By shifting focus like this, a distinctly darker, gloomier mood is created, speaking to the dire situation, both in terms of what the Flood could do if they leave Halo on the ship, and what exactly has happened to the captain. Not too far into the game, Keyes gets relegated to mere mentions here and there, which doesn't allow him to be a very complex character. That being said, Halo is not a very character-driven experience, and so making the captain singularly brave and willing to do whatever it takes to serve humanity allows that to become his defining trait. Because of that, you get a strong, if simple, idea of who he is, so you do want to fight to save him, even if you haven't seen him do that much. Someone that distinguished and honourable dying like this would be tragic, and as such some narrative motivation is implicated into gameplay, effectively keeping in step with the established tone of the mission. After some searching, you find the ship's gravity lift, fortunately still operational. As you head to the control room, the havoc the Flood wreaked here is evident. Much like the ring's interiors from 343 Guilty Spark, Covenant huddle around corners in fear of the parasites, and the entire place is generally falling apart. Seeing that within a Covenant-made environment further illustrates the reality of their presence. As we're back on the Truth and Reconciliation, the way forward is rather familiar, and you soon enter the control room. We see that Keyes has been slowly, ghoulishly infected by the Flood, with no signs of human life remaining, having finally turned moments before we entered the room. Master Chief, understanding what he must do, punches through what used to be the captain's face and retrieves the neural implants. God damn, this is brutal. I can't say I was super emotionally invested in Keyes, but he didn't deserve a death this undignified, and as the death plays into the driving motivation for the narrative, it's ascribed some significance outside of the loss of a character. Now that we have what we need, a final push is made back out to the vehicle bay, this time leaving in a Banshee and making our way to the Pillar of Autumn.
This thing is falling apart!
It'll hold.
We're not gonna make it!
We'll make it.
Pull up! Pull up! You did that on purpose, didn't you?
The chants are brought back to the forefront as we survey the rotting carcass of the Autumn, a stark contrast to its introduction in the first level. The Covenant's religious zeal has led to this moment, the Flood systematically infecting and replacing a symbol of humanity. You then explore the metaphor, re-entering through an escape pod bay just how you exited. Walking through the husk is striking, retracing your steps almost, and causing you to reflect on the journey, what you've been through and what you've accomplished. You started on the Autumn ignorant of the Covenant, Flood and Ring, but now, armed with the truth, you can finally finish your mission. Everything looks bland and dull, painted by the fetid brush of the Flood, soon finding them shambling amongst the hallways. You have to get to the bridge where Keyes' neural implants can be used to overload the fusion engines and create the explosion needed to take Halo out of commission. Covenant can be found too, introduced once the point that the Flood here are making has been driven home. Their presence, along with the Sentinels later on, help keep gameplay from falling flat or feeling standard and well worn. You make it to the bridge and Cortana sets up the detonation on a timer, but is cut short by 343 Guilty Spark, who's found the ship and is deriving all the data from its systems. They've stopped the timer, so Cortana and Chief devise a plan to take a more manual approach via the engine room. On the way there, all three enemies come out in full force, making for high intensity gameplay, fueled further by the narrative context. Seeing the different groups fight it out is really cool, and the music remains a constant but dynamic presence, suiting the shooting and small moments of re-exploration aboard the Pillar of Autumn. Although all the enemy types are here, this isn't a culmination or summation of the gameplay experience. Crammed back into a tighter space, reliance on the shotgun again becomes natural, and enemies can be so numerous that you're reticent to throw the weapon away for something a bit more interesting. The shooting is still fun, it's remained so no matter where it took place, with the exception of the library, but the feeling of finality isn't translated to your gameplay decisions. I suppose trawling around with the shotgun does sort of represent what you've had to resort to survive the circumstances, but that ultimately results in simple, if tense, encounters. You make it to the engine room and Cortana explains the process. Once the shaft leading to the fusion drive core is open, you can chuck an explosive in the fusion reactor to destabilize it. This will have to be repeated for the 4 different reactors, but should trigger the detonation sequence. The mission's building anticipation pays off, as pulling this objective off is stressful, with the Flood and Sentinels constantly interfering. It doesn't help that jumping doesn't feel that great, managing to feel heavy on initiation but floaty once you're off the ground. Additionally, grenades aren't that bouncy, lamely skipping across the ground, making the throws tough to nail. Once all 4 reactors are destabilized, the destruction begins, and you have 15 minutes to get out of there. Cortana calls Foehammer for evac, and learns that the engines sustain more damage than expected, so the time until detonation is revised to just 6 minutes. You hop in a hog and take off to the evacuation point. Thus begins the iconic escape sequence. Just like against the Covenant, and then the Flood, and then the Ring itself, the odds are completely stacked against you. You got 6 minutes to make it 2 kilometers across a ship that's falling apart and littered with parasites, some of which explode and derail you. The Warthog controls really stick out here, as the circumstances amplify all their frustrations and faults. On some level though, that only adds to the atmosphere. Every mistake can be tough to correct, and you'll be gritting your goddamn teeth begging this thing to get going again. In an out of character moment for Halo, there's actually an ever-present objective marker here, giving you an indication of how good or bad you're performing. The architecture and layout of the ship is of course not helping things. It wasn't made to be navigated at this pace in this sort of mania. Despite all this and the driving drums that underline it, making it to the extraction point with 2 to 3 minutes to spare is incredibly comfortable, to the point where you're waiting around for Foehammer to show up. The drums are replaced by tragic, mournful strings as the Pelican rounds the corner, billowing smoke with 2 Banshees in pursuit. You hear Foehammer's panicked voice as she careens under the bridge, passing by, presumably crashing, becoming her downfall.
Echo 419! She's gone.
Well, shit. The timer starts back up, 2.5 minutes. The objective marker's now back, 1.4 kilometers, and Cortana's found one last UNSC longsword ship on the Autumn. The main theme kicks back in, and it's time to get the hell out of here. Man, I love this. Foehammer's death, like Keyes, isn't super emotional, but it is meaningful. Much of our success was facilitated through her transporting of us, and she serves as one final reminder of why we need to escape. That's who we're fighting for. This is the final moment for Master Chief to prove he's the savior. An objective marker is so rare in this game, and so needed in this section, that you value its appearance, only for it to be a bait and switch, getting you comfortable right before the heat's really dialed up. The music does a great job pushing you forward though. The main theme's been reserved for these important underdog moments, like when we stormed the beach in Silent Cartographer. The sharp violins are triumphant while also feeling reminiscent to the stinging stabs you'd hear in a horror movie, perfectly punctuating the duality of this escape, its importance to the narrative and visual spectacle. The ship is literally exploding around you now, and even though this final stretch is much more scripted and directed, it's still exhilarating on what's probably my 8th time playing it. The Warthog's blocked off by debris in the final 100 meters, so you hop out, taking care of a few final Covenant and Flood as you run by. Master Chief barely makes it and promptly starts the ship, taking off as the explosion truly begins. The chants return a final time to hail the savior of the galaxy, as the ring is strewn apart. The wonder, beauty and mystery from the enchanting title screen completely destroyed, creating a strikingly parallel image that displays what our time here has become. Cortana tells us that there's no sign of life on the ring, only her and Chief made it. She rationalizes the decision, which will have killed some UNSC soldiers, as necessary. There was no choice. The success of their mission was ultimately due to sacrifice, in the process making for a story that can turn the savior into a martyr. Cortana insists that Halo is finished, but Master Chief laments that it's just getting started. Of course, Master Chief was right. If you complete the campaign on the highest difficulty, you see 343 guilty sparks floating through space, implying the continuation of the story, and we're of course aware of how successful and long-running the series has become. Halo Combat Evolved was so well liked back on release for a lot of reasons, and I think you can play and enjoy it today for many of those same reasons. The control are the most pressing factor in this regard, not just the dual stick aiming, but the rest of the controls, which are distributed across the controller to accommodate what feels most natural. These controls don't just make shooting tons of fun, but also very accessible. The range of weapons is modest but diverse, with the 2-weapon limit forcing substantive short-term gameplay decisions, all while easing the player into shooting really nicely and playing into the narrative tone. The HUD does a great job of communicating the necessary information without imposing on the experience too much, making gunfights feel directed and controlled by your skill, becoming more engaging and rewarding as a result. The enemies you fight play into Halo's gameplay strengths, contributing to play through their behaviour and AI while not being so specific in their strengths and weaknesses that they become one-note or dull. But what really defines Halo gameplay is the level design and structure. There's a diversity in space and location, playing on and in between extremes of linearity and non-linearity. Halo can thereby craft a vast range of unique encounters, seeing the potential in the systems I've just covered and then effectively delivering on it. There's no dissonance between the fights out in the beaches and hills of the ring and the tight, corridor-focused fights of Halo's internal workings. It all feels like Halo and captures different moods of its gameplay identity. That, of course, includes exploration. Each mission plays into the idea of mystery and exploration in a way suiting its narrative context. In the Covenant Cruiser, you're eager to learn about their culture and how they function, and when on the ring's surface, you're curious about its purpose or meaning. Every mission encourages you along in a meaningful but non-intrusive fashion, resulting in a gameplay experience that the player can take some real ownership over. All of these gameplay aspects are in part brought to life by fantastic presentation. Halo crafts a strong visual identity with the polygons to back it up. Character models look rather detailed for the time, and the textures and effects do a great job of selling the world's environments. Some technical decisions seem to be made with the perspective in mind. Normal maps and God rays drive home the greater immersion inherent to the first-person perspective. Beyond that, the different factions and architecture distinctly stand out with points of comparison, like those between the Pillar of Autumn and Truth and Reconciliation, only highlighting the differences present. It's also worth noting again the designs of the Covenant and Flood. You can really learn a lot from a biological point of view just by looking or listening closely. All of this brings Halo's universe alive, and although it's clearly aged, I was never bothered by the graphics in my playthrough, and in fact was still impressed many times over. There's also the graphics of Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, the remaster from 2011. Just to briefly touch on this, the graphics look better on a purely technical level. There's more polygons, textures are more detailed, lighting and particle effects are all better, but some of the charm and style has been leached from it along the way. It all looks a little over-processed. The Covenant technology all has a highly polished, metallic look in the original, but much of that identity has been stripped away with the introduction of these graphical changes. This is especially evident in the plasma pistol, with notches and grooves ultimately overcomplicating things. The new graphics don't look bad, but they don't quite look like Halo 1. Of course, when talking presentation, I can't gloss over the music. It manages to be incredibly diverse, tonally consistent, and contextually distinct. I don't know any other video game series that has music that sounds like Halo's does. It captures the themes at play, understanding the relationship between mystery, faith, and exploration. It's absolutely integral to not just the series' identity, but the act of playing and understanding Halo. Halo CE without its music isn't truly Halo CE. The same goes for the themes and world. The ideas of faith, mystery, truth, and exploration play so naturally into Halo's gameplay and design strengths. It's the perfect fit. The themes at play don't just engage with the shooting parts of this first-person shooter, instead leaning more into overarching, substantial design decisions like the structure and pace of a mission. This makes them feel integrated at a deeper level than you typically see in an FPS at the time. The repeated religious references and allusions create legitimate ties between this fictional universe and the player's own, encouraging rumination on what it's discussing, and by extension a deeper level of narrative exploration on the player's part. At the same time, these religious references weave so naturally together with the game's themes to not come off as ham-fisted or a shallow attempt at seeming smarter than it is. Halo builds further investment through its clever half-step of world building, refusing to fully explain itself, as though this world is alive and legitimate from the start, doling out additional info here and there. It also excels at some more ground-level narrative stuff as well. The character writing is distinct and well-defined, personality shining through in dialogue and remaining with you despite the brief conversations being had. There's also some great pacing, as the mystery is again utilised to keep the player in the dark, and as such tell them only what would best prepare you to fully enjoy the gameplay to come. This all culminates with a message, or lesson perhaps, that while rather basic, feels effectively communicated and appropriate. This feels like a complete narrative experience without being predictable or dull, which is more than you can say for a lot of video games. Now, all of this has been overwhelmingly positive, but there are faults here and there. I think the biggest is the way characters are actually handled outside of their dialogue. Captain Keyes remains integral to the plot right to the end, but is relegated to mentions here and there while we don't actually see any of what he's doing. You could argue this allows mystery to be built around him, but to me it comes across as clunky and poorly implemented. His death feeling meaningful to the in-universe events, but rather weak to the player. Then there's Master Chief himself. He is the one who ends up discarding ignorance for truth, delivering the game's point, but as he has practically no personality, you don't get any impression that he's actually learning that as you play. I have discussed his character multiple times so far, but that's all using extraneous information coming from sources that players couldn't be privy to at launch. Within the base Halo 1 experience, Master Chief is badass, sure, but he's also pretty boring and thin, with the savior angle tying him to the religious aspects and helping him stay afloat. From a gameplay perspective, well, there's the library. That mission is really just miserable and kind of sums up what Halo can be when it's at its worst. It's vacant of everything that makes Halo's gameplay fun. The fights feel redundant given they play out very similar to those from the mission before, and the repetitive visual design makes this fascinating ring structure become uninteresting, with the important foreshadowing that Guilty Spark engages in being devalued in turn. But these missteps ultimately take up little of the experience and are far outweighed by what Halo does right. It solidified how console first-person shooters would be interfaced with going forward, and as such has aged tremendously better than its peers. The gameplay is still super focused and fun, naturally acquiescing to each circumstance you find yourself in. Visual spectacle remains even 20 years later, with the music becoming absolutely legendary since. Halo compellingly lays out its world, creating an engaging set of events to live out and become a part of, while having great thematic implementation that adds a valuable layer of depth to its narrative aspects. This game birthed a massive franchise, made an entire division of Microsoft viable, expanded to dozens of novelizations, as well as other storytelling mediums, and manages to hold up on almost every level 2 decades after release. There's an undeniable magic here, and Halo Combat Evolved is completely deserving of your time, even after all these years.
Whoa! Let's get it on!